Let's talk about working in teams. Since I've been here at UCF, I have never had a team fail or do a poor project because of technical difficulties. After all, you are technical people. You're either an engineer or you're computer science, and you have the skills and abilities to overcome these technical difficulties. You also have a huge faculty here at Harris, in the Harris building, where you can find someone who's an expert in the field and ask them the questions that can get you the answers to solve your problems. Where the difficulty comes in is with team dynamics that are not functioning correctly. It's the interpersonal team dynamics or the structure of the team dynamics. That's where teams run into problems and are not able to do a very good job. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is what makes a team not function well, how do you overcome these things right now. So we're going to go ahead and talk about those things right now. To cover this topic, we're going to start with team success and what that means. We'll talk about team goals and activity, social loafing, roles and behaviors, communication, conflict, and decision making. So why do you work in teams? Why not just sit at your development desk, write your own code, make it work? Let me ask you, what teams have you been a part of in the past? They may have been sports teams. They may have been here at UCF, maybe in one of my classes, processes or senior design. There are actually quite a few opportunities at UCF in our curriculum to work in teams. Teams actually differ from groups. I know a lot of times we work in groups, and sometimes I even refer to our teams as groups, but they're really teams. The reason that teams are different from groups is that they have applied functions. And I know when you've had me in class, either for processes or senior design, you know that one of the first things I ask your team is, what roles do you each have? And that's the difference between a group. A group is someone who just, maybe a bunch of people who get together and play volleyball, or a bunch of people who get together and play cards. But a team is a group, is a set of people who gets together to solve a problem. And as such, you're going to, each person or each part of the team has to have some sort of a role, or maybe your roles might overlap a bit, but that's the difference. So ask yourself, does your team have clearly defined roles? And we'll talk about this later. If your roles are not clearly defined, then it really does hurt your efforts. What function are you performing in your team right now? So organizations are shifting away from individual work performed. I had a friend who worked for Computer Sciences Corporation, and he used to sit in a room and they'd say, write this function that does this, and he'd write it, and he'd unit test it, and he'd turn it in, and then he'd get another function to write. That has to be the most boring thing to do, but we don't even have that anymore. Every job you get, and I'm sure those of you who have interned so far, you always work in teams. You never really, there's no such thing as a lone wolf anymore. Maybe in rare occasions, but usually you're working on some sort of a team. So don't think that you're going to get a job and you're going to sit there at a desk and program all day long, write code all day long, and not interact with a bunch of people. Those days are long gone. So you might be asking, well, what does it mean for a team to be successful? And we're going to go through some of those criteria, how you can judge if a team is successful right now. So there are 4 conditions for team success. The first condition is that the team must have the right people to perform the task. Sometimes we refer to this as team composition. Now, I know some of you are going to say, well, I'm doing the machine learning part of my team's project, and I don't know it. I'm learning it right now. That's okay. As long as you have the ability to learn the machine learning part of it, learn TensorFlow or Keras or whatever you're going to do, you're still the right pick for that. The task must be suitable for teamwork. I unfortunately had a project I worked on about 4 years ago. I was working for a Department of Homeland Security doing a contract. And the idiot who was running the project thought, well, let's write the dynamics together. And so we had 4 people sitting around a table, all writing documentation. And the way documentation should be written is one person writes it, then you sort of pass it off for editing, then you pass it off for comments or whatever. It was the most grueling process I have ever experienced in my life to write documentation with 3 other people. So that was a time when the task was not suitable for teamwork. The team must combine its resources effectively to complete the task. So that means if you're the database person, or you're managing the database, creating it, that you're interacting with everybody else, but then there's a person who's good at APIs, maybe there's a person who's good at front end, but you're pooling your resources so that you're bringing to bear on the project a maximum effort. The organization must provide a supportive context for the team. I guess in this case, the organization is UCF, and certainly UCF provides a good context because we have really nice classrooms, we have the labs, we have the faculty, we have TAs, so there's a lot that UCF offers to help you with their projects. So now the question I'd like to ask is, when were you on a team that was not successful? And I have a TA in Senior Design 1 right now, and she tells the story. She's already given this year. She's already given her talk on. I have her come into SD1 and talk about her experiences. And she mentioned that she was on a team of 5 in Senior Design 1, and like only 2 people, including her, did any of the work. The other 3 didn't really do anything. And so she kind of feels like that was not successful. I mean, the project turned out okay, and she passed and all that kind of stuff. But it could have been so much better had there been full buy-in by everybody. So team composition is important, and at the same time, it's not that important. It depends on who you are and what kind of team members you have. So the first question you ask, do team members have the needed knowledge, skills, and ability? And you might be doing the API or the database or the machine learning or the front end, and you might not really have those skills, but you're a technical person and you have at least enough skills that you know how to learn those things. So it's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily work against you if you don't have certain skills, as long as you have the ability to pick up those skills. And over my tenure as a software engineer, there were a lot of things I did not know how to do, but as long as you know how to figure it out, it still works. So is everyone on the team highly talented at technical tasks? Maybe yes, maybe everybody's like really sharp and they know everything. But does this guarantee success? And the answer is not necessarily. You would think it would, but what happens is a lot of people, I'm not sure if you've ever sang in a chorus or a choir or anything, but have you ever had like the soloist in the chorus who, like, I don't know, it's kind of like Barney Fife and Mayberry. He was always sticking out. You have someone who thinks they're the best in a chorus or choir, and they're always sticking out, and they're not blending. Someone who thinks that they're too good for the group or whatever. You all have to just have a really good attitude, and that will overcome this. Besides talent, successful teams need members who have interpersonal skills. Very important. And so technical people have a reputation of not having good social skills, although I think that's changed a lot. So just make sure, if you're the type of person who's shy or the person who's sort of introverted, that you sort of come out of your shell at least a little bit and are able to work in a team. Now there's a joke. How do you tell if a computer scientist is introverted? And the answer is they look at their shoes. If they're extroverted, they look at your shoes. I know that we have this reputation of looking at shoes instead of looking at the people. But so team composition is important. It's more important that if you don't have the skill, you at least have the ability to get the skill. So when are teams appropriate for the task? And I mentioned already that one project I was on, that contract I was doing for Department of Homeland Security. And one of the tasks I was doing was not really very good for a group, right? But here are some guidelines for when teams are appropriate for a task. So the work contains at least some skilled activities, maybe here again, coding or API or database or whatever. The team can form a meaningful unit within the organization. And we actually talk about this a lot more when we do Agile, about this idea. But anyways, you have some sort of a clearly defined input and output and stable boundaries. So and this is actually what you need to do when you're doing your design work. So maybe you're writing a function. What's the input? What's the output of the function? And I talk about unit testing at a certain point. And unit testing, it's all about input and output, and to make sure that they're both correct. Valid performance evaluation systems exist for both the team and its members. Now, a lot of times people see this idea of evaluations and they're like, oh, you mean I'm going to get graded or someone's going to judge me or whatever? That's actually not the point. The point is, did you get your job done? Did you do it right? And I know I've already explained Gantt charts, and that's the purpose of a Gantt chart. Is you have this timeline, you have this task, and the Gantt chart can tell you if you're done or not. And we're going to talk about Agile shortly. If you're doing some sort of an Agile methodology, it's essential that you know that you're done or not done. Timely feedback is possible. That's why you're doing your weekly meetings. And I've had teams that one of the persons on the team comes to the meeting, hey, are you done? Yeah, I'm done. But they don't show the output of their work. Next week, hey, I'm done. And 3 or 4 weeks later, the team comes to find out they're not done. They hadn't done anything. They just said they were done. So timely feedback is not only that the member says that they're done, but they show you that they're done. The team is capable of measuring and controlling the import variances in the workflow. So this can be, a lot of times you might be working with a sponsor to maybe gain resources or gather requirements. The tasks are highly interdependent, so members must work together. And that's one of the things I showed you when I talked about Gantt charts, is that the Gantt chart shows you the dependency, so you know who's waiting for you and who needs you to finish so they can do their job. Have you ever been on a team where the task was not suitable for teamwork? I know I have been. Not only that one example I gave you, but I have many years as a software engineer, and it's not that uncommon. So now let's talk about team goals and activities, because without goals and then the subsequent activities, you're not going to get very far. So your team needs goals. I know that they had a study that they did at Harvard University. This was, I think, in the late 50s. And they solicited from the graduating class, how many of you have goals and how many of you have written goals? And there were 3%, I think, of the graduating class that had written goals. And then they went back and they studied them 20 years later. And that 3% actually had 95% of the wealth in that graduating class. So their written goals made a huge difference in where their lives went and their success. It's the same way on your team. Your team needs to have some sort of written goals so that you know where you're headed, what you have to get done. And a lot of this is going to be, a lot of your goals will be obtained when you gather requirements from your sponsor, or if you're in processes, maybe this is a project that you're doing yourself, or maybe it's a team, a student-led project or whatever. But you somehow need to have your goals, and that's where the Gantt chart is good. And when we talk about Agile, we'll be talking about the product backlog, which is really your list of goals. So the goals serve as a standard that can be used to evaluate performance. And here again, I'm not saying that we need to evaluate every person every time, give them a grade, give them some sort of mark. What we're doing is we just want to make sure that every person is held accountable and that they are able to get their work done adequately. Motivate team members by encouraging their involvement in the task. So members are not going to be motivated if they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. I can guarantee you that when someone knows what they're doing and when it's due, and sort of what the definition of done is, then they're going to do a lot better. And I know this puts at least some pressure on the project manager. The project manager, so the whole team comes up with the goals, right? But the project manager is hopefully organizing this and kind of keeping track of who's doing what and when they're done and all that kind of stuff. Provide some sort of criteria for evaluating whether stuff is done. And we actually end up calling this the definition of done. If you don't know what, like if you're doing the front end and you don't know what done means, you could spend like 3 weeks just on your front end and just, I know, making small changes and, adjustments and stuff like that. But you need to know what done means. What is your API? What is done for your API? What is done for your database? So this idea of definition of done is very important in software. Serve as a way to inform outside groups about the team. Okay, so when you have a job, you're going to have a project manager, maybe who's not part of your team or doesn't spend much time, or you might have your director of technology, or you might have your CTO, or maybe just the occasional walk by the CEO. So you're going to have to somehow represent what you're doing outside of your group to say outside people who aren't part of the group but want to know and have they're stakeholders anyway. But so you're going to have to represent that. Determine when team members should be rewarded or punished for their performance. Now, you're not going to really punish someone. You're not going to put them in the corner and say, you're in timeout till you're done. What you really want to do, though, is the punishment is really, it's not really punishment. It's really what you need to do is just say, I couldn't do my job because I didn't have this thing that you were responsible for, therefore you held me up. That's all you need to do is just let them know. You don't want to, we want to get away from this idea of punitive actions. We just want to let people know. What's a reward? A reward for me would be, hey, you did a great job. I'm able to use that. So what we want to do is we want to lean more heavily towards this idea of reward and this idea of praising people when they do the right thing. Have you ever been on a team without clearly defined goals? I certainly have, and it really makes it hard because you don't know what to do. What are the current goals for your team? So now what you need to do is turn that around back on you and say, well, I'm working on a team now. Okay, what are our goals? And what are my roles? So roles and goals, that rhymes. So what are the goals for my team, and am I on track? And so you need to ask yourself, and maybe in your next team meeting, you ask yourself, what are our goals? Do we really know what our goals are? And I have to admit, there are some sponsors. I have one group in SD2 right now, and their sponsors all over the map. So, I do understand that their goals they fluctuate on a daily basis. So sometimes you sort of face that, even when you have a job. Sometimes you're going to face goals that are all over the map. So there are stages of teamwork. You form your group, your team, and you just get to know each other. And this is actually one of the things that happens when we do the senior design boot camp. You just kind of get to know each other. Storming, this is where you, I know it says conflict here, but conflict isn't necessarily bad. Remember that the saying, iron sharpens iron. So all you're doing is getting together, you're hashing it out. Who's going to do what are your roles going to be? How are we going to work this out? Then norming is when you actually sort of get down and you roll up your sleeves and you got the stuff done. Performing, here's where you write your code and it works. Hopefully you're doing unit testing. And adjourning is when the project is over and hopefully you graduate from UCF, or in a job, hopefully you move to another project. I've had projects though that just lasted for years. I got onto another project, and then because the project that I was doing, they needed extra help or whatever, I had to go back to it or whatever. I always like to go to new projects. I never like to go back to old ones. So now this is the part of team dynamics that is the most difficult to deal with, this idea of social loafing. What do you do if someone's not doing their job? So I'm sure you are all well aware of being on a team and having that person or those couple of people, or in Laura's case, my TA, 3 people not doing their jobs. What do you do? How do you describe that when someone is slacking off? Well, the kind way of referring to this person is called social loafing. And there are two causes, main causes. There are obviously other causes, but the main causes are this free rider idea. Well, I'm going to get the same grade as the rest of my team, so I'm just going to do the minimum. I got other things to do. I got a girlfriend or a boyfriend. I like the band. I'm in the band, or I like to watch TV or whatever. And it's not a problem. I'll just sort of I'll coast. I'll keep my head low and I'll coast. Now, I do have a senior design story about this. This is from probably 4 or 5 years, maybe 4 years ago. And there was a team of 4, and 2 of them did 0. And those 2 had jobs at Amazon and Google. They were lined up. They were gonna, so all they had to do was graduate, and they were gonna go to Amazon and Google. But they did 0, and it was demonstrably a fact that they did 0. So they did not pass senior design. Now, if you don't pass senior design 2, you know what happens? You go back to senior design 1. So that was another year of being at UCF that they had to go through, and it totally blew their opportunities for those really good jobs. So just because you're a free rider here at UCF doesn't mean you're actually going to skate through, because normally, yes, you get the same grade that everybody on your team gets, unless there's some very obvious deficiency in your performance. The other time that this happens is when you have this what's called a sucker effect. That means someone worked really hard. They actually knew what they were doing. They worked hard. They got their stuff done. And basically, in their mind, they're done, right? And they don't want to be taken advantage of because they worked really hard. You know, the rest of the team did okay, and they worked really hard. And now they're just not going to do anything more because they did their part. So that's another time when someone can slack off and not do anything really. And you know, in a way, I kind of see their point. I did my part. Why do I have to do anything more? But that's not the way teamwork is. Teamwork means until you're done, everybody's pulling in the same direction and working. So if the team's goal is merely a collection of individual tasks, yeah, that's great. This is not the best way to motivate a group of people. This does lead to social loafing. Individual performance can easily be hidden in a team's effort, leading to social loafing. So it's really kind of easy to hide and just keep your head low. Although eventually people get irritated. I had a group 3 years ago, and at a certain point, 4 out of the 5 members sent me an email and said, "We're not working with her anymore. Like we're just not going to work with her." And I had a meeting with them, and I said, "Well, you know, it's not your choice. You know, as your team, you have to work with her." And they said, "Doesn't matter. We're not working with her," because they had gotten so upset that she didn't do anything. And so I had to make some adjustments, and I worked it out. They actually didn't work with her, but I worked individually with the person who was the loafer. Another reason people don't pull their weight is that they overestimate what they did. Like they overestimate sometimes the value of their contribution. And so they're like, well, I did all this and this and this, so I don't need to do anything more. It doesn't really matter what you think you've done. And you still need to, it's like I said, it's a team effort. I once had this guy who, he was working for Cisco. He worked for Cisco for 30 years. He really did know everything, but he actually, unfortunately, did everything too. He almost sort of bulldozed everybody out of the way, so that he actually wanted to do it also. Anyway, so how do you deal with this? How do you overcome this idea of social loafing? Well, make sure your tasks are interdependent. Like I said, if you have these sort of very standalone tasks, it's really easy to not get them done. Increase team motivation, have really good meetings, talk about it, praise people, clarify team roles. A lot of times if your roles are not clear, it is harder to get stuff done. Make each individual's participation observable and measurable. So you want to make sure that things are very transparent. When we talk about Agile, Agile one of the pillars of Agile is that everything is transparent. The more transparent you can make any project, the better it's going to be, because people know. Like if I'm doing a project, a task, and everybody knows I haven't finished or I haven't done it right or I've got bugs or whatever, then it's going to motivate me. But if I'm able to sort of lay low and just hide, it's really difficult. So then the question you have to ask yourself is, when have you been part of a team with a strong sense of identity and high motivation, which prevents social loafing? A lot of times that's a sports team. I'm not sure if anybody in here has ever played softball or baseball or football or soccer or anything like that. But there is a perfect opportunity where everybody knows that you're either doing your job or not. So let's talk about roles and behaviors and the relationship of roles and behaviors to team performance. So team roles. Roles are one of the basic building blocks of successful team's performance. Remember, we talked early on that groups are just a collection of people, but teams are a collection of people that are working on a common task, and they all have their own individual roles. Sometimes they overlap. A role is a set of behaviors typical of people in certain social contexts. Roles within a team are similar to roles in a play, right? They describe what people are supposed to do and how their parts relate to what others in the team are doing. So role ambiguity and role conflict are sources of relational stress. If you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, or if you think you're doing one thing and another person thinks they're doing the same thing, guaranteed it's going to lead to team dysfunction. So early on in the process, you all need to know and decide as a team who's doing what, how they're doing it, and to define the rules of the road so that everybody knows what their role is and what they're supposed to be doing. Two types of team behaviors: the task behaviors. That's where you actually have a task, like create this table, this database table, and populate it or whatever, or write this function or this API endpoint or whatever. So those are task behaviors. Social behaviors, that's that interchange of ideas of people. That's what you're going to be doing at your team meetings, talking to people, hopefully encouraging them, hopefully helping them solve problems. But both of these are crucial. You can't have just one. The task seems like all you would have to do is, everybody creates a bunch of functions or API endpoints or database or whatever, but you need the social part of it too, or it just doesn't work. Yeah, and so I've noticed over the years that some teams will sort of tend to be more task oriented, while some teams will tend to be more social oriented. It's okay as long as the balance works for the chemistry of the team. So communication, this is the very first thing I talked about in senior design and processes, because communication is so important. Without this, you might as well just quit and be a psychology major or something. So I know it probably sounds like hyperbole, the foundation of everything. Communication is the foundation of everything, but it's really not. This is really where most teams go off the rails, if they do. Good communication skills. If I'm communicating with you, then you trust me a lot more. Okay. If I'm not communicating well with me, you're like, well, what is that person hiding? Or why aren't they telling me what's going on? It establishes appropriate team norms. So if you guys are talking, if your team is talking, you know that being late to a meeting is not acceptable, or that taking a week off to go to the beach is not acceptable. Although it's fun, it's not acceptable. Develops a collaborative and creative climate. By the way, and that last thing, going to the beach, I do have students who say, hey, I'm going to be gone this week. I'm going to be at the beach, or I'm going to be snow skiing or whatever. So that's unacceptable, since everybody signed up for the course and they know what the course entails. Develops a collaborative and creative climate. You do want to collaborate with your team members, and it does foster creativity. You want everybody to be trustworthy. You want to know you want to know the roadmap. You want to be collaborative. So this is going to actually work to the team's benefit if you can just keep your communication lines open. Now, I do know that life happens, okay? And sometimes, like, really bad things happen. One summer I had a couple who they went to New Orleans. On the way back, they got into a wreck with an 18-wheeler, and they were out for a couple of weeks. But the thing is, they communicated that with me and their team, and so everybody knew. But if for whatever reason they hadn't communicated, their team would just think, well, they're lazy and they're ghosting me. They're totally disappeared. So the idea is that you're keeping in contact with your team, even if some life happens and there's something, maybe you have COVID or whatever, I don't know. But a lot of over the years I've seen really interesting things, different things happen to people. You just need to let your team know, okay? Bad communication habits. Teams have potential to make better decisions than individuals, unless it's groupthink. Sometimes groupthink is that thing which, you're like a herd and you're migrating in the same direction. But in essence, though, a good team that has a really good dynamic will make really good decisions because you have all these different opinions and points of view and stuff. You can have dysfunction, though, if the information is processed incorrectly. You want to focus on a common information shared by everybody instead of unique information known by a few. That goes back to, I've mentioned silent information before. Seeking only information that confirms pre-existing. This is the group thing idea I just mentioned a minute ago. You definitely don't want to fall into the trap of group think, because then you're not making really independent decisions and really worthy decisions. You're just sort of going with the flow, which I like going with the flow sometimes, but if it's a wrong decision, I don't. I'll give you an example of this. I used to be a senior software engineer for Landmark Communication, and I'd walk into a team meeting, into a department meeting or whatever the meeting was, and the management people would be there, blah, blah, blah. I have a disdain for most management, although a lot of them are really good. But they'd be like, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this is what you're going to do. And they tell me and my team what we're going to do for the next 6 months. And if I would just sit there and take it, like for 6 months, I was miserable because I knew that their decisions were boneheaded. And then eventually I started speaking up and I would say, no, I don't think that's the best way to do this. And I want to say, here's what I think. And they would usually actually accept my opinion and sort of factor it in. And then that way the next 6 months for me was not so unbearable. It was actually a pretty nice project. In fact, eventually it got to where I'd walk into a meeting and they say, oh, Rick's going to tell us what he thinks. But the thing is, you can't be a victim of this idea of group thinking. You have to really speak up if it's necessary. Now, you don't want to speak up just to speak up. You want to speak up only when you have something to add. Sometimes it is better just to kind of sit in the background and just listen. This third bullet point, processing information only in terms of false dichotomies. So it's either true or false. You guys are binary. A lot of what you do is binary. But, there's this whole computer science realm called fuzzy logic where things are shades of gray. And really, in software development, a lot of times things are shades of gray. So try not to get steered into these false, true, false decisions. So we do want to talk about positive versus negative communications patterns. And I know that in the senior design boot camp, we talk about that. Evaluation versus description. Evaluation is when you're sort of passing judgment. Description is when you're just saying what you see. Remember when I said if someone didn't do their job, you don't want to say, hey, buddy, you didn't do your job, I'm mad at you. What you want to do is say something like, I was waiting for this API endpoint so that I could do my job. Well, it's not there yet, and therefore, I can't do my job. And that's description. That you see what the problem is, and you just describe it. Control versus problem orientation. A lot of people are control freaks. Let's stay away from them. Just orient yourself around the problem. Deception versus honesty. I don't think I need to go into any detail on this. You always want to be honest. I know sometimes people think, oh, it's better to tell them a white lie and just kind of get through this than to, it's really not. Neutrality versus empathy. So you want to try to be empathic if you can. Oh, you said you couldn't do that API endpoint because of this, this, and this. There's probably a legitimate reason. That was my Google Calendar. There's probably a legitimate reason for that. So you just want to be empathic and make sure you're taking all of that into account. So I know I've mentioned this before, how to have a good team meeting. Only have a meeting when there is no other alternative. So I'm the victim of these sort of never-ending series of meetings. I know, though, that you should be meeting with your teams at least once a week. Hopefully that's once a week in person, and maybe short sub-meetings on Discord or somewhere. Put the purpose of the meeting in writing. So the project manager should send out some sort of a bullet list with the agenda for the 5 things you're going to do at the meeting, or 4 things, or 6 things, or whatever. Don't give this long list of 15 things. It just doesn't work. Start and end the meeting on time, because what that's doing is showing respect for the people in the team. Don't be late, by the way. If you're late or you leave early, it's really bad. What you're doing is you're disrespecting your whole team. Unless you have a good reason, there might be a reason, hey, I've got a class, I'm always going to be 5 minutes late. Just let people know ahead of time. You have a class, you're going to be 5 minutes late. Minimize disruptive behaviors, such as drinking stuff. It's okay to drink stuff, but if it's taking away, or smoking or vaping or whatever. I had one person when we were virtual with COVID. He was walking his dog during all of the meetings, and obviously that showed total disrespect for his team. And once the meeting is over, the PM should send out some sort of notes, summary information of some sort for what happened in the meeting. That way there's no question. Everybody knows what happened in the meeting, and it's sort of a way to make sure everybody's in agreement with what happened. So let's talk about conflict. You're not going to be able to get through any team project without some level of conflict. So misconceptions about conflict. All conflict is bad and should be avoided. So that's untrue. Remember, I mentioned that iron sharpens iron. So sometimes when my idea goes against your idea, we can come up with a much better idea than both of us individually had. All conflict is caused by misunderstandings amongst team members. That's not true. People just have different values. Remember, we talked about values. All conflict can be resolved to everyone's satisfaction? No. Sometimes you're just going to have to say, okay, I'll give way to the will of the team. It's 4 against 1. And so I'm just going to have to maybe trust that the 4 people are making a really good decision. So conflict is inevitable. It's produced by change. It's often beneficial to the team's success. A lot of times after conflict, your project is better. Healthy conflict arises from focusing on task issues, and maybe you have the difference of opinion how to do a task. I know I have this anti-pattern called a golden hammer. Personally, I've been doing this is how I've done it the last 10 years. I'm going to do it again. But sometimes someone will come in and say, hey, if you do it this way, it works a lot better. And so that might be that's a small conflict, but if I can, take the person's word for it and kind of look at it, it might really help me. Legitimate differences of opinion about the task, like I said, you might have 2 people think, well, I want to use MongoDB, NoSQL, or I want to use MySQL, a relational database. And what you do is you just get together and hash it out and make the right decision for the project. And really, there are guidelines for how to make those decisions. Differences in values and perspectives. Different expectations about the impact of decisions. Not all conflict is good, though. I know I'm painting this rosy picture of conflict and how much good it can do your team. But there is unhealthy conflict that can arise, like competition over power, rewards, and resources. And I've run into this in corporate America. This is what happens a lot of times. People have what are known as turf wars, or they have You're trying to sort of get a promotion over your dead body. Conflict between individual and team goals. So really the individual, it's great to be an individual. Like I said, I always make sure I give my opinion and if it's necessary. But you still are a team, and even, it's like I said, the person in the choir or chorus who's sticking out, you don't want that. You all need to be pulling in the same direction. Poorly run team meetings, no notes, no agenda, people are late, people are not paying attention. I know that when you have online meetings, a lot of times people play games on them. I've had teams say, hey, so-and-so, all he's doing is playing games. Personal grudges from the past. Oh my goodness, I experienced this firsthand. I used to work for this company, and we all shared, developers each shared an office. And across the hall from me was a pair of developers who hated each other. They would not speak. So I got on a project with both of them, and like, it was really bad. They would not speak. I don't know why they were in the same office, but I think they were speaking fine and on good terms. And then they had a blow up one day, and that was the end of it. So this does happen. Faulty communication, like I was saying, if you are not letting your team know, even if I know life happens, but if you don't let them know, then they're gonna think the worst. They're gonna think, oh, they're ghosting me, they don't care, or whatever. So just make sure you have really good communications. So how do you do conflict resolution? Well, you can collaborate, work together to intentionally solve a problem. I love pair programming. Pair programming is probably the best way to do this. I know people think that pair programming is a waste of time. Well, you have two people writing the same code as one, but believe it or not, you actually end up with a better product. Compromising, bargaining when a win-win isn't possible. Sometimes you just have to compromise and say, well, I think I'm right, but for the good of the team, let's just move forward with your solution. Accommodating, smoothing out a situation by giving up on a position. I don't like giving up on a position just to accommodate people. I would not do that. I'm always going to be, I'll speak up and then, okay, so you convince me maybe your solution is okay. But I'm not going to just be a passive voice and sit there and not give my opinion. Forcing is bad. Compelling a zero-sum solution in a win-lose. You never really want to force a team member to do anything. Yeah, you might. They still might not like your final solution, but you at least want to hash it out and talk to them. Withdrawal or delay dealing with an issue. So I actually used to live in North Carolina, which is considered the South, and people in the South have this. Have a lot of them, not everybody, obviously, but they like to avoid conflict. And so a lot of times I'd have family members or friends, and I think everything was okay. And later on I found out it wasn't, because they didn't want to sort of bring something up. So you don't want to avoid dealing with issues. Eventually you have to deal with them. And the later you wait, the worse it is. So what are steps for negotiation? Separate the people from the problem. In other words, separate the values, right? So everybody has their own values, and everybody's values are different, but you don't want to factor that in. Focus on shared interests. Well, what's your shared interest? Well, I want to graduate from college, or I want to get a paycheck, or I want to finish this project, or whatever. Develop many options to be used as a solution. So there's this guy I know, he's got a lot of patents, and he used to do the senior design boot camp, and he said before he will do anything, he will come up with 100 potential solutions, and then he'll decide. Well, I don't do that, but I like to come up with a bunch of solutions. Evaluate options using objective criteria. So here again, objective criteria is better than feelings. Feelings are a really misleading way to make a decision. Keep trying. So let's talk about decision-making models now. All right, decision-making comes in many flavors, or at least several flavors. One flavor is the leader-oriented decision-making model. That's where you have the strong leader who is sort of guiding you. I don't mean they're manhandling you. A lot of times, even a strong leader is going to listen. In fact, the best strong leaders always listen. But A lot of times you have someone on a team who's really strong. I know I mentioned that person who had worked for Cisco for 30 years, and he definitely was a very strong leader for his team. Unfortunately, he didn't listen very well. Team-oriented, that's probably what most of you are at this point, where you sort of have a consensus of the team and you try to work through it. And it may not be pure democracy, but it's pretty close. And finally, full consensus is very difficult. It's where everybody agrees on everything. Can you imagine how tough that is at times to get everybody to agree on everything? It's pretty difficult. So how do you know what the right approach is? Sometimes a decision isn't that important, right? Is a high quality decision required? Sometimes it's not. You just gotta, as Larry the Cable Guy says, sometimes you just gotta get her done. Does the team individual have enough information to make a decision? You don't always. Like, maybe it's a decision between MongoDB and MySQL. Well, how are you going to decide? Well, you gather information and then you have it, and then you can make a decision. Is the problem structured? And this means, is there something you can hang your hat on? Is there something, is there some way you can make the decision? Who will be tasked with implementing this decision? And this is what I was telling you about when I would walk into a meeting. If you don't say something, you're stuck with the decision. So you do want to try to factor in the person, like the database person or the API person, who's ever domain this falls under. You need to make sure they're okay with what you're doing. What's the social standing of the team leader? Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's not, and you sort of have to rely on where that is. Do members agree on how team goals are attained? And that goes back to the storming and norming part of the team dynamic that we first talked about. You need to agree on how you're going to set up your goals and how you're going to know what that definition of done is. Guidelines, if you're going for a full consensus, I don't even want to talk about. I just totally recommend full consensus. I just don't think it's a good idea to go that route. If you want to do it, read this slide. Other than that, just forget it. So this book, Group Dynamics for Teams by Daniel Levy, is what I use to develop these slides. It's actually a pretty good book if you can check it out from the library or find a copy online or a Kindle version or something. I know what you guys do. Most of us, you just find the PDFs. I actually had the book. Dr. Heinrich lent it to me. So anyway, that's actually a really, really good book. I do recommend it if you want to sort of pursue this, especially those of you who want to go into project management. This is the type of stuff that you need to kind of reason through.